Welcome to the recording of the first session of our 3-week training course, Growing Discipleship Communities with Rick Hill. This first session looks at what discipleship is, what does it look like to follow Jesus, and how can we grow in this intentionally. And in the next few weeks, on this Thursday, 6 p.m. and the following Thursday at 6 p.m., we'll be looking at how can we create communities where we look into this further, and then how can we see this being multiplied together and outworked in mission. So I do hope you enjoy. Rick Hill goes straight into the content here. So I do hope you enjoy this next 40 minutes or so. There is time for reflection as well. There'll be a few questions that come up throughout this session. So please make sure that you have a pen and a paper in front of you and just do jot down your thoughts. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope to see you this Thursday at 6 p.m. for the next session. Thank you.
Critical at this time in our culture, in the moment that we currently live in, without mentioning the C word, but why is this critical? Why is this important? And then we're going to look at 5 kind of pillars of spiritual formation, and that's going to be the practical part towards the end of tonight. And I think Andy's going to throw you into breakout rooms towards the end as well. And I suppose tonight, maybe the next 2 weeks will probably be a lot more practical in terms of really helping you to think about how do I lead a small group, how do I mentor, disciple others, how do I grow my own discipleship journey. But tonight is probably a little bit more setting the foundation for what's to come, although I'm hoping there will obviously be practical things that will come out of this as well. I'd love a bit of interaction as well. So I think sort of to break my input into 2 parts, I'll invite you to share some stuff in the chat, maybe even to kind of take some of you off mute and share some of your reactions and reflections to what I'm sharing. And do use if you want to use the Slido stuff for Q&A, I can maybe review that sort of towards the second half of this session and try to take maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the end, or else use some of your questions to shape what we do next week or the week after. So does that sound okay? I'm glad you said that because I've nothing else planned for the next hour, so that's okay. So yeah, so please do interact as we go. I mean, I want that. I don't just this want to be a lecture, but it's really interesting those words that you've used to summarize the word discipleship, because there are such a multitude of definitions for what a disciple is or what discipleship looks like. And there are so many different words and terms that we could use, and none of them are perfect, so plenty of people have a definition for discipleship. But actually for me, I mean, so actually to pick up some of the words that you used, someone used the word intentional, and I love that because I think that summarizes part of what discipleship is. There's an intentional aspect to this. Somebody said growth, and that's key, and we'll think about that tonight. I didn't see so much of the word relational in there, so we'll maybe unpack how that's a key aspect of discipleship as well. But really for me, I'm going to share my screen here. For me, the kind of key image of discipleship, I'll just throw it on the screen, is this one, okay? So it's not a sentence, it's not a definition, but it's quite simply an image of an L plate. And I know some of you, maybe 17 years old wasn't that long ago for some of you, and maybe this brings you out in cold sweat, I don't know. But for me, this is the best image for the concept of discipleship. In fact, the word disciple, the original, actually is called mathetes, and that's the original. In the original language, the word disciple means mathetes, and mathetes simply means learner. Okay, so it's brilliant to be on a call with a load of students tonight, because that is the phrase student, learner, apprentice is as close to the word disciple as we can get. And really, a disciple of Jesus is someone who is continuing to learn the ways of Jesus. And it's a continual process, so it's not just a one-time decision. It's a consistent and a continual thing. We all need to learn more of Jesus. And I had a boss probably about 15 years ago, my first job, and she continued to say to me, wear your L plates with pride. And I love that. And there's a little bit of I guess in our culture at times, there's a bit of an expert syndrome, especially at the minute. Everyone wants to be an expert on everything. And I don't know if many of you follow football, but I love this. I'm not a Liverpool fan at all, but I love this interview with Jurgen Klopp about 3 months ago when he was asked his opinion on the coronavirus crisis. And he laughed and he said, I don't have a clue. I'm paid to coach football. He says, how would I have a theory or an opinion on that? And so we do like to be experts, but actually, if we're followers of Jesus, that means we should continually be learning, learning more about Jesus. And so, just a couple of definitions. A guy called Carl Martin, pastor of Baptist Church in Edinburgh, writes this. He says, discipleship is apprenticeship to the words, the works, and the way of Jesus. Again, that word apprenticeship, this idea of learning. And that's also captured by Dallas Willard when he says discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. And I love that idea. If Jesus lived, in your skin and in your shoes, actually discipleship is the process of becoming the type of person that he would be and the type of things that he would do if he were you. And notice the key word there is process or becoming. It's a gradual, it's a continual thing. And then Eugene Peterson wrote that discipleship is a long obedience in the same direction. And again, I just love that as an idea. So if you pushed me to define discipleship, I would use the L plate image, but I would also use words like intentional and relational and growth and metaphors like apprenticeship and walking close. But let's look at what the Bible says as well to define discipleship. Because discipleship is at the heart, not just of the Bible, but of the method of Jesus. So, Jesus could have used any method he wanted to spread his message to the world. And one of the key methods that he used was not to, do a public speaking tour all around Colosseums and to philosophers and Caesars. But what he chose was to invest in a small group of people who went on to influence and impact the whole world. And I don't know how you approach your small group or, something that you do maybe in the life of your church or in your everyday life, and sometimes think or feel that it's small, well, there's only a few of us, there's only 5 or 6 of us, or there's only 3 of us. How could that be important or impactful? But as we watch the life of Jesus, we see that actually small doesn't mean insignificant. And we're going to look at one passage, Mark chapter 1. If you do have a Bible, I'd love you to just look it up. But I wonder if you've ever noticed how the Gospels are bookended by discipleship and disciple making. So in Mark chapter 1, Jesus calls his, one of the first pages of the Gospels, and Jesus calls his first disciples. Okay. And then at the very end of the Gospels in Matthew chapter 28, he challenges them to make disciples. So Mark chapter 1 is an invitation to become a disciple. Matthew chapter 28, at the very end, he's challenging them to be disciple makers. And that's actually our invitation tonight or in our lives right now, the invitation to continue to be a disciple of Jesus, and also the challenge to make disciples. There's an invitation to us and there's also a challenge to us. And discipleship is Jesus' first invitation and his final command. So let's look at this passage. In fact, I would love if someone just look, why don't you, if you have the Bible with you, you've been very vocal already tonight, so you can take yourself off mute and you can read out the passage for us. That'll be brilliant, just to change it from my voice. So Mark chapter 1, verses 16 to 20.
Absolutely. So Mark 1:16 says, passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. And immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on a little farther, he saw James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, who were in the boat mending the nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. So 3 really simple observations to start tonight and to really frame our discussion so that whenever we use the term discipleship, this is what we're talking about. Okay, 3 aspects from this passage. First of all, discipleship is about following. So we're walking through life with Jesus. That was the first invitation. Come and follow me. And it's really important because I'm guessing a bunch of you are leaders. Okay, so you're leading maybe in a CU committee, or you're leading in a small group, or you're leading maybe in some other aspect of your life. And sometimes what we can do is jump too quickly to think about leadership and miss out this simple invitation to be a disciple. And actually, that's our first calling. the first calling we have is to come follow, not come and do for me, not even come and be this type of person, not, it's come follow me. I wonder if you've ever thought about why these disciples were so quick to abandon their nets and follow this man. I mean, why on earth did they leave their job at the drop of a hat simply because some bloke walked along a beach and asked them to? At once they left their nets. There's an immediacy. I think to understand this, it probably helps to know a little bit of the context. So in Jewish culture at this time, boys would have attended school until the age of 13, and their education would have been focused on studying the scriptures. And actually, they would have aimed to learn and memorize the whole of the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Old Testament, by this age. Okay, I wonder, you guys are all older than 13. I wonder how you're getting on with that. But those who showed most potential in their study around the age of 13, 14, 15, and had done well at memorizing the Torah, they were then invited to attend what was called Bet Midrash. Okay, that means the house of study. It was basically a rabbi's school or study group. And they then spent the next few years training to become rabbinic teachers themselves. But those who weren't invited, or those who didn't make the cut, they ended up back in their family home as apprentices learning their father's trade to one day take on the business for themselves. Okay, so the best of the best get to attend a rabbi's school and learn, study the scriptures and do more of that. The rest end up back at their father's business. Now you see where this is going. Okay, so that's the context. Where does Jesus find these young men in Mark chapter 1? Finds them doing the menial task of mending their nets back with their father's business. That's why this is really important. And Mark records that they were with their father, Zebedee. They were learning the trade and apprenticed to their father. In other words, they weren't with another rabbi. Or to put it another way, they hadn't made the cut. They weren't the best of the best. These young men who had probably been let go or released, Jesus issued the invitation to become his disciples and learn from him. So of course, what an opportunity. Of course, they abandoned everything and rushed to accept his invitation. And the heart of discipleship is an invitation to follow Jesus and to walk with him. And no matter how far on the journey of faith that we go, we don't leave that invitation to walk in his steps. So it's not just come and see, come and be, not just come and do, but it's come and be with me. That's the invitation. Come and follow me. So it's, as I said earlier, it's continual, not static. Second thing, okay, is that Jesus said, come follow me and I'll make all your dreams come true. Isn't that right? Have a look. What he said was, come follow me and I will look after you and you'll have a really nice life. Didn't say that either. He said, come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. In other words, I will change you. I will shape you. And Jesus was being really clear what following him meant right from the outset. So implicit in his invitation, he also threw in a challenge. And the challenge was to become like Jesus. Come and follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So to follow him meant change. And Jesus invited these disciples to a journey, not just of relationship, but of transformation. He called them to follow him and he was going to change who they were. And again, in the Jewish culture at this time, the call to discipleship was initiated by a rabbi, and each rabbi had his own kind of requirements that he required his young apprentices to follow, and that was called his yoke. And so disciples took on the yoke of their master. And when a disciple learned how to emulate his rabbi or carry his yoke, then they could become a rabbi themselves. And disciples would have had a real deep desire to emulate their rabbi. Okay, so following in the footsteps of a rabbi meant imitating their master as best they could. And this went further than just his teachings or beliefs. So it also included imitating sometimes how their rabbi talked or walked and sometimes even ate. So some disciples went to extreme lengths to imitate their rabbi, even to the extent of there's kind of ancient traditions or legend stories that said that some would have even followed their rabbi when they went to the toilet because they literally wanted to be right beside him. And I was with someone today, and they were speaking. I was listening to them speak. And as I was listening to them speak, I could hear the tones of someone else who I know really well. And I knew they had been in the presence of my friend who speaks in a certain way. You know, we all do. You know, we have certain intonations and things that we emphasize and little accents. And this guy was speaking really like my friend. And I could tell he'd been with him. Do our lives reveal or show or give clues or hints that we've been with Jesus, that we are his? You know, there's loads of chat, and I know in student life there's loads of chat about God's will for our lives. You know, what's God's will for our life? You know, what should we do with our life, or who should we marry, or what's God's will? It's a big question. But the goal for your life, okay, God's biggest goal for your life is not what you will end up doing or where you will end up living, but actually you would become like Jesus. C.S. Lewis put it like this: the church exists for nothing else but to draw people into Christ and for them to become little Christs. And that, for me, captures again the heart of discipleship, is that our aim and our goal is that we want to become like little Christs. So if you've ever wondered what God's will for your life is, that's it. God's will is for you to become like Jesus. Jesus' invitation to discipleship included that challenge, the challenge to become increasingly like Jesus. And again, that process will not end in this life. And the final thing, and really want you to catch this, and we'll think a lot about this in the third week, and a lot more practically in the third week. But discipleship also involves mission. And sometimes some people who write or speak would like to divorce these two things. So there's like discipleship is really important, and then like mission as if that's something completely separate. And obviously they are distinct in some ways. But every disciple should see themselves as being sent by Jesus. So it's not like there's some people who are really good at discipleship and then there's some people who are really good at mission. Or like, oh, well, I really enjoy the discipleship stuff, but I'm not that into mission, or vice versa. Jesus' first invitation was to follow, and his first command was to fish. Okay, come follow me, and I will make you what? I will make you fishers of men. So there was a missional imperative right from the start. Jesus was saying that the more you follow me, the more you will fish. And so the discipleship that doesn't push towards mission will eventually become self-serving. And you really want to think about that in your groups. Think about this a little bit later tonight too. But in your small groups, or as you lead, the call of Jesus is not to form cozy huddles or inward-looking cliques. But he challenges us to be outward-looking, forward-moving, lost-reaching, gospel-speaking, kingdom-minded people serving mission-focused people. That's what he wants. So there's an outward dimension to the call of Jesus that moves us from being consumers to contributors in the kingdom. And you know, that's really important, particularly at your age and stage, that actually you learn now that actually this isn't just about me being fed, but actually it's about the contribution that I can make to the kingdom that Jesus is building and establishing here on earth. So don't miss the multiplication impact or effect of encountering Jesus. Following leads to fishing. Encounter leads to evangelism. It should move us from being consumers to contributors in his kingdom. So discipleship should always push people outwards as well. Now, just to summarize this, I'm going to get you to kind of contribute in the chat in a few minutes, or certainly actually initially to reflect on your own and then maybe contribute in the chat. But just to summarize this, I've used words, but again, I really love images to help remember these things. It's just so a really simple, I'm just going to give you a really simple lens, almost to, I guess, analyze or reflect on the journey of discipleship that you're on right now, or to give you a lens to analyze perhaps your small group, or even your CU or the church you're involved in, or whatever. And it's really, really simple. Culture should say out, okay? So it should say up and out, but I didn't change it earlier by mistake. So 3 little things, okay? And these all link to the 3 things that I've just said. So we started by thinking about how discipleship was following Jesus. So discipleship always should push us to look up. Okay, we look up to Jesus as we follow him. And if discipleship doesn't do that, then we get lost. Okay, because we end up thinking that it's about us. It's about trying harder, being nicer, being more moral, and that's not the heart of discipleship. We start by looking up to Jesus. He's our example, okay? But also Jesus changes and transforms us in our lives as well. So actually it should impact our everyday lives, who we are, our actions, our attitude, and our character. But also, so that's the imitation piece, but also then this going or sending or mission piece, discipleship should push us out as well. And Bobby Harrington says this, he says, a disciple is someone who is following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and is committed to Jesus' kingdom mission. So do you hear that? Following is the first little phrase, imitating, the second phrase, and going. So up, in, and out. And if you're leading a small group or wanting to disciple others, then this starts with you. It doesn't depend on you, but it does involve you. So before we get to how we're leading others, which we're going to both tonight and in the other sessions, I just wanted to start by helping you or challenging you, I guess, to reflect on how you're living and modeling these three aspects of discipleship. And remember, without an upward emphasis, we get lost. So if we take Jesus out of the equation or we lose step with him, if we focus so much on just how we're changing and then activism, doing good works, outward stuff, then we get lost. And if without an inward emphasis or without a community of people to share our faith with, we get lonely. But also then without an outward emphasis, if it's all just about me and Jesus and, me growing with a kind of small group of people, and we miss the missional stuff, our influence is limited. Okay, our influence is limited. And that's true, by the way, both for our lives and our groups. Okay. So what I would love you to do just for a moment in quietness, I'm going to stop talking. I'd love you just to reflect on that as a lens of discipleship. Okay. And I'd love you to think about it, first of all, for your own life. And to consider what do you need a better emphasis on in your disciple making or discipleship. Maybe for that relational dynamic with Jesus. Maybe for some of you, you've lost this idea of being like Jesus, imitating him. You kind of want to follow Jesus and you kind of want to serve him, but actually you've lost this idea that he wants to change and shape us. Or maybe for some of us, we've lost this outward dynamic, this missional imperative that he calls us to. So just maybe where you are, 1 or 2 minutes, just take time, journal, write, answer that question, write down a response to that question, and then I'm going to get you to share some of that in a moment in the chat. So let me start this wee section with a story, okay? Just to, oh my goodness. Just to set the tone, okay? So over the last few months, lockdown and all that, as a family, we've really begun to embrace the outdoors, and we've taken more walks than ever. Certainly when coffee shops were out and all that type of stuff. And with our boys, 2 boys, we've loved just exploring forests and mountains and trails. And recently we were walking in a forest and we came across, not too far from our house actually, and a couple of you might know it, so Ballybowley Forest. And we were walking there and there's a section of the forest that has been cut down recently. And what used to be this is not a real photo, but what used to be hundreds and hundreds of trees was now a wide open space with nothing else there. So just like a barren, almost wilderness, and literally this used to be hundreds of trees. But interestingly, right next to the area that had been deliberately removed was a number of trees that had fallen down by themselves. And these were trees that looked like they had stood for maybe some time, maybe hundreds of years, but had suddenly fallen down at a similar time as the others around them had. And I guess I might ask, was that just a coincidence? Was it just a coincidence these trees that had fallen for hundreds of years had fallen down just pretty soon after all these other trees had been taken down around them? Or was it that these trees had been sheltered for years by the other trees around them? And they'd protected them from the wind, and they'd given them nutrients from the root system, And was it maybe that they hadn't needed to develop any strength themselves because they had been surrounded by other strong trees? But whenever these things were stripped away and they found themselves on their own, exposed to the elements, suddenly they weren't strong enough to survive on their own. And I guess the image of these fallen trees can be taken in two directions, okay? It could, on one hand, represent followers of Jesus who have grown up within a context of what I would call maybe Christendom or a dominant Christian culture, okay, where their faith was really rarely challenged, and they often found themselves among people who thought like them and acted like them, and then suddenly confronted with an alternative worldview or a growing secular culture, there can be a crisis point, okay? For many, this actually can be the university years. And you've maybe already witnessed that in friends, or maybe even yourself. So that's one way that you can kind of represent my little parable. Okay? But it can also represent this moment of time that we're currently in, as the devastation of a virus impacts our society and our normal structures and even our faith. And some things, our normal patterns of faith have been stripped away. Okay, some things that we might have taken for granted or relied on for our faith have been stripped away. And it's time where some Christians perhaps have floundered or drifted to the fringes of church or faith or fellowship. Okay? So either way, whether it's representing kind of this cultural moment in terms of these few months, or whether it's, you know, the kind of broader secular culture, it shows why the whole area of discipleship is absolutely critical and important. It shows why we need to create, develop, and grow communities of disciples who strengthen each other. Because A, the culture is really, really strong, and the culture is really good. This culture that we live in is really good at forming people. Okay? Really good at forming people into how they think and how we act and how we live. This culture is strong. And B, because the moment that we're in is stripping things away that we once relied on. And there's a danger or a risk that we could flounder or drift. So let me give you 5 examples of 5 different Christians, okay? 5 different types of Christians, okay, who might struggle in this time. And then I'm going to give you an antidote, or you know, going to suggest what they might need, okay? So for some Christians, their spiritual life has been reliant on being spoon-fed answers their whole life. They have relied on other people's strength, I guess, and being told what to think and believe. And the critical need for them is to teach them to feed themselves, okay? So for that, they really need, those Christians really need to invest in spiritual disciplines. And I'll unpack each of these 5 in a few minutes. So for example, our 7-year-old, at breakfast time in the morning, he has learned obviously how to feed himself, and he feeds his breakfast and he eats his porridge, you know, and occasionally we have to encourage him and remind him to eat and not play or talk so much, because school's, you know, he needs to get to school on time. But our youngest son, he's just turned 3. I'm still shoveling porridge into his mouth every morning, because if I didn't do that, he wouldn't eat, okay, and it wouldn't get, or else it would be around our floor, okay. So for some people, but if I'm still doing that with him in a year or 2 years' time, there's a problem, okay. I need to teach him how to feed himself. Spiritual disciplines, we need to help people grow in spiritual disciplines, okay. For other Christians, okay, Christian number 2, their coming to university has meant that their access to their church family is now limited, okay. They used to be involved in lots of things during the week. They're no longer there. They're displaced maybe geographically. They're maybe not even able to get home at the weekends as much. And they desperately need to meet with and grow with other Christians their age. So their key need is Christian community. Okay, they need other people to grow with. For some Christians, okay, number 3, they've learned lots about Christianity from books and talks and sermons and platforms and pulpits. But the critical need is for them to see what they have learned lived out as a living example, okay? They need someone to walk alongside them who will be a relational example to them, okay? So they've got lots of knowledge, but what they need to see is it lived out in action. And number 4, for others, their spiritual life has all been about themselves. Okay, they have been so consumed in their own growth and their own stuff that they're doing, and they need to grow through service and mission. They need to learn to serve. They need to learn to look out, as we've just been thinking about. And lastly, some other people's spiritual lives have been reliant on really high-powered events and special spiritual experiences, maybe summer things or weekend things. And they have only learned to follow Jesus whenever life's going well. So they're kind of the mountaintop Christians. Whenever life's going well, me and Jesus are sweet. But whenever stuff, something goes wrong, or someone gets sick in our family, something happens to us, suddenly we dive into the valley. The critical need is to help them understand how followers of Jesus aren't immune from suffering, and it involves a cost. And what they need to learn is how to follow Jesus in what I'm going to call crucible moments, okay? Moments when they're in the fire and the flames. And actually, this could really relate to our current circumstances right now. So these 5 things, okay, what I've just described are all aspects of how we grow as disciples of Jesus. And some people assume that the sum total of discipleship is Bible study, okay? So I'm growing as a disciple if I'm reading my Bible. Well, that might be true, but it's not going to be totally true if you're missing some of these other elements. Some people might assume, well, I'm serving Jesus and I'm doing service and mission, but actually they're neglecting that kind of private devotion. Their public life is good as Christians, but their private life is empty as believers. So they need to embrace spiritual disciplines, okay? And you probably see where this is going. And what I'm going to get you to do is chat in breakout rooms in 10 minutes or so about what these look like, and maybe you pick out some things that are particularly key either for yourself or your group, okay? And if 1 or 2 pillars of these 5 are removed for some time, then growth is still possible, but it might be weakened. But take them all away and the building will tumble. So what I want to do is just consider for a couple of minutes each what these look like in practice, okay? So spiritual disciplines. And I've got a kind of verse from the Bible to kind of summarize this or to capture this idea. So for this one, pick John 15. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. And then an amazing 7 words that I wonder if we really believe. Apart from me, you can do nothing, Jesus says. Apart from me, you can do some things. No, apart from me, you can do nothing. And this kind of idea of spiritual disciplines is this idea of abiding in Jesus, learning to abide in Jesus. And it's so easy for us to focus on things that are seen above the surface, because that's where our culture pushes us. So social media profiles or Instagram filters or showing that we've all together. But for me, the image of an iceberg is a really helpful one, because the strength of an iceberg isn't found in what's above the surface, but in what's below the surface. And if I'm, I guess to ask a challenging question, how are you building below the surface of your faith? How are you learning to abide in Jesus? And how can you help others to do the same? And to fuel our engagement in the world, we need to embrace spiritual disciplines. So regular rhythms and patterns of reading the Bible, of prayer, of daily worship, on your own, by the way, or with others, and silence and solitude. And none of these things are sexy or spectacular, but they are all foundational. Fruitfulness, Jesus is talking about fruitfulness, it requires faithfulness. It requires us to abide or remain, as the other translation of that verse, in Jesus. It's allowing the Word of God and the presence of God to fuel our lives. And this is critical. And I said earlier, the culture's strong. The culture is too strong for us to rely on a once-a-week meeting or to do a quick 5-minute Bible reading in the morning. In some ways, that might have been easier in Christendom, although I'm not so sure. But we need to learn what it means to abide and remain in Jesus. So how are you building daily habits and regular rhythms of devotion, develop your awareness and fuel your spiritual growth? As I said, you'll get a chat about this in a minute. What I'm sharing, by the way, is not the last word in many of these things. It's probably more a spark and a first word. Okay. And the second pillar I want to talk about is Christian community. So in Hebrews 10, the writer says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approach. And it feels like these words are probably even more important at this time. And this is not to kind of rail against anyone who is very nervous about being in public with people at the minute, but actually, are we developing rhythms and patterns of Christian community? Because spiritual growth requires it. Christianity is not a solo sport. Following Jesus isn't singular, it's plural. And I said earlier that running was my sport, okay? And running is often seen as a solo sport because, you know, you can do it anytime, anywhere. A lot of people run on their own, and I was out this afternoon and run on my own. But I've learned that there's a powerful group dynamic to running. So I'm part of a running club, and I've found that whenever I run with other people, it helps me to run faster. So it's bizarre. It just, so, you know, I don't know whether it's been my pride, but I'm determined to stay on the heels of the runner in front. I'm not letting, you know, I'm not dropping off the back of this group. And I guess when I'm tempted to drop the pace, when I'd be tempted to drop the pace on my own, you know, when I'm with others, it encourages me to either run faster or run further. I'm encouraged to run an extra mile when actually I might be tempted to cut or run short, you know, if I'm on my own, find a wee shortcut or turn around. And I've found the same to be true with following Jesus. Christianity is not a solo sport. So as I've taken my place in a small group, I've been encouraged by, you know, seeing someone else's faith up close, even in the midst of some of the greatest trials of their life. I get to see that up close. Or I've been challenged as I've watched people in a small group step up to pray, you know, for the first time, or practically serve others in a time of need. Or in a community of discipleship, it's a place where we can talk to each other about the implications of knowing Jesus in our circumstances right now. Last night, I was in our church building with our home group. That's the way it's working at the minute. But I was listening to people talk about how their faith is meeting their circumstances. And I need that. I've learned from the insights and wisdom of older people as they talk about their faith in Jesus. And I've been reminded of how God is at work in our lives as I've watched people encounter God in new ways. J.D. Greer writes this: God allows various members of his body to see and experience different dimensions of his beauty. And as we share these things with others in the body, we all end up with a fuller picture of Jesus than anyone could have obtained alone. That's part of the beauty, he says, of being in a local spirit-filled church. And I love this last line. He says, you see so much more of Jesus than you can alone. That's a picture of a small group. You are helping people to see more of Jesus than they could if they were alone. And for me, this has become even more critical and important in the context of social distancing or increased isolation or periods of lockdown. We need to create communities of discipleship that continue in whatever form to help people see more of Jesus. So we need Christian community. We need to invest in that, and we need to help develop that for others. Okay, relational example is the next one. So brilliant verse from 1 Corinthians 4 tells us, even if we had, Paul writes to the Corinthians, tells them, even if they had 10,000 guardians in Christ, they do not have many fathers, for in Christ Jesus he became, or I became your father through the gospel. And then he tells them in the very next verse, therefore I urge you to imitate me. And what Paul was telling these young Christians was that they have plenty of guardians and gurus and religious philosophers. Corinth was full of them, who spoke at them from afar. But what they needed most was a spiritual parent who modeled faith up close. And people are obsessed with like Christian celebrity speakers, but actually your faith will not be driven or reliant on those. Not a guardian is what you need, a spiritual guardian, but you need a spiritual parent. And you can be that to others as well. So one who doesn't remain at a distance, but one who comes close and shows people how to follow Jesus. And in our culture, even the church, we've information overload. There's thousands of books and there's podcasts, and Andy's got a great one. But there's other resources available at our fingertips, okay? And if you've been in a church for 10 years, you've probably heard about 500 sermons. We don't lack information, but we do lack living example. And I said earlier, I was a youth worker for years, and so many times I held a Bible up in front of a group of young people, and I told them, you know, if you want to read this, if you want to follow Jesus better, you need to read this book. And I was right to say that, by the way. But I'm sad to say, on far fewer occasions did I sit down beside a young person, open it, and say, and here's how I do it. You see the difference? One is telling people what to do. The other is showing them how to do it. And we don't need more experts in the church. We need more examples. Too often our discipleship relies on pep talks and programs rather than personal examples. So you know what your purpose is in leading a small group? It's not just to lead a discussion and get through to the end of a resource or finish the questions. Your role is to become a living example to the people that you're trying to lead. And you won't be the perfect one, but you can be a personal one. How am I going to teach my son to cross the road? So, I could tell him about the Green Cross Code, tell him about cars and tell him to avoid them, and then just say, go for it, son. There's a road, there's a big road. Good luck, God bless, Or will I take him to the side of a road, hold him by the hand and walk with him lots and lots of times? Will I tell him or will I show him? So how then will we teach someone to pray? By telling them that prayer is really important? Yes. By putting on a prayer course? Maybe. By getting a book about prayer? Or by modeling it in the environment of a small group community? Here's how I pray. Or let me pray with you. Giving people opportunities to pray for themselves. When I think about how I grew most as a young Christian, I don't think about programs or preaching. I think about people. I think of John, who was a teacher in my school, Mr. Gardner, who talked with me honestly about the negative influences in my life. He was a Christian teacher, taught history. I think of a youth leader, Mark, who gave me opportunities to serve when I didn't know, having a clue what I was doing. Gave me opportunities to speak and lead. I think of an older Christian, Dave, who opened the doors of his home to Sarah and I when we were dating and engaged on a regular basis and spent time with a group of us. I think of a friend I made in summer mission who showed me what it looked like to be a man who lived for God. It's a personal example we need. And I love 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 8. Actually, for me, this is the best definition of discipleship I can find. Paul writes, because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share not only the gospel of God with you, but our lives as well. That's the heart of a community of discipleship, guys. It's sharing the gospel, but it's also sharing your lives. So if you lead a small group, think about how you can be, how you can go beyond the program to get involved in people's lives, to share your life with one another. How can you be a living example? I'll fly through the last two because I want to get you chatting, okay? Service and mission. We see this in Luke 10, where Jesus sent out, first of all, the 12 in Luke 9, and then the 72 in Luke 10. And just to say, we need to be active in our faith, okay? We've thought about this already, so I won't dwell on it. But, discipleship is not just coming to a course and learning more or sitting in a group and learning more. It's actually fueled by when we step into opportunities of mission and service. So actually, when we're sharing our faith, that's going to cause you to pray more. Whenever you are involved in mission and somebody encounters Jesus afresh or for the first time, it's going to build your faith because you're going to see God at work. When someone asks you a tough question about your faith, it's going to drive you back to the Bible to find out the answers so that you can answer them. And I know I've said already that the culture is hard, okay, but Alan Scott kind of counteracts this when he writes much of modern discipleship is focused on making believers strong enough to survive the culture instead of being bold enough to transform the culture. Now, part of this, we need to realize it's Jesus who transforms, okay, not us. But what we need to realize is that actually Jesus in us wants to push us outwards. 9 chapters into Luke, 10 chapters into Luke, Jesus isn't just giving them more talks. He's sending them out, and then he brings them back and he debriefs. So do not, all year, don't just retreat into your Christian bubble and stay safe. Jesus sent his disciples out, and notice that they did it together in pairs. So how can you support each other? Like what little, even challenges or activities can you set in your groups? And then what Jesus did was he brought them back in at the end of Luke 10, and they reported back and they said, well, we couldn't drive out these demons, or, these prayers didn't work. And Jesus debriefed with them and talked with them about what had happened. Okay, so service and mission. And lastly, crucible moments. I think we're in one culturally. What does James write? He says that we should consider it pure joy. Does it feel like that? Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. This is where I disagree with Martin Luther, by the way. Martin Luther described James as the epistle of straw, and I'm like, there's nothing straw about that. That's pretty solid backbone stuff. So James starts his letter by telling Christians it's a joy to face trials. It's an incredible perspective. But remember the story of the trees at the start. Because I've been thinking a lot recently about how our faith can not just, survive, but actually it can thrive and flourish whenever some of the things that we might have leaned on or relied on have been stripped away. And I wonder if actually the moments of difficulty and darkness in your life are the real opportunities of growth. So in your life, how can you embrace the crucible moments, trials and tests, and use them as an opportunity of growth and stretching? And I'm not using the cliche, God's got a purpose for for everything, you suffer. He probably does, but sometimes we don't need to hear that in the moment of suffering, okay? But what we need to realize is that we shouldn't run or flee from wilderness or testing or trial, but we should look out for how God is wanting to shape us through them and in those moments. And then in the lives of those you lead and disciple, in your small groups, how can you walk with people in their trials and use them as teaching moments or learning experiences? How can you actually bring them to the fore in your group and not, push them to the side or the back because it's too awkward to talk about? How can you bring those to the fore? How can you embrace the moments of wilderness in your groups? And that requires wisdom, by the way. But how can you try to bring those to the fore and use them for good? So there's the 5, okay? I'm going to call them the 5 pillars of spiritual formation. I'm sure there's others, okay? But that'll get us talking tonight. And I'm going to throw 3 questions that I've got in the little chat.